Please support this channel by subscribing. Your support means everything to us and helps us keep creating stories like this. No one in Voss Keep said the princess's name without lowering their voice. Princess Lilith Voss was only 7, yet the castle trembled when she cried. People called her the Calamity Princess, not because she was cruel by choice, but because her grief had become power-wild, sharp, and dangerous. 23 caretakers had been hired, trained, and warned. 23 had quit, fled, or broken down in fear. Even the court mages refused to enter her wing now. The vampire nobles whispered that the king's heir was cursed, and that the curse would soon swallow the whole kingdom if the child was not contained. But the one person who didn't know those rules was the newest night janitor, a human single mom named Quinn. Mara wasn't supposed to be in the royal corridors. She cleaned what she was assigned, kept her head down, and tried to earn enough to keep her life from falling apart again. Her uniform was too thin for the castle's cold. Her shoes were worn, and her hands carried the look of someone who had worked through hardship for years. She had lost her husband to a fever in a poor village, and she carried the ache of raising her little girl alone like a quiet bruise beneath her ribs. When she took the job at Voss Keep, she didn't do it for adventure. She did it because survival doesn't ask what you want. It asks what you'll do. That night, Mara was mopping the black marble near a corridor she had never seen before, the one the guards called Forbiddens. The air there felt heavier, like the stone remembered too much pain. As she worked, she heard it soft at first, almost like wind in a crack, then clearer. A child's sob, thin and tired, as if crying had become normal. Mara froze, her mop dripping quietly onto the floor. Every sensible thought told her to step back, to pretend she heard nothing, to keep her job and her safety. But the sound wasn't a roar or a threat. It was the sound of someone alone. Mara set the mop aside and walked toward the half-open door, careful like she was approaching something fragile. Inside the room, candlelight flickered like it was afraid. Toys lay scattered, some broken, some untouched. Velvet curtains were torn at the edges, and the cold was so sharp it pressed against Mara's skin. In the far corner, wrapped in shadows darker than the rest of the room, sat a small girl with silver-white hair. Her knees were pulled to her chest, and she clutched a torn piece of fabric like it was the last thread holding her together. Lilith didn't look up, but the air around her pulsed, and the candle flames trembled as if her sadness had weight. Mara didn't march in like she owned the place. She stayed near the doorway, lowered herself to the floor, and spoke gently. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, not as a servant to a princess, but as a mother to a child. "I'm not here to hurt you." Lilith's sobbing didn't stop. The shadows shifted like they were listening. Mara's heart thudded, but she did something simple, something that didn't belong to vampire magic or royal power. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn hair ribbon one her own daughter used to keep in her palm when she was scared. Mara didn't offer it as a bribe. She held it lightly, like a promise. Then, quietly, she began to hum a lullaby from the human world. No spell, no ancient words, just a slow melody meant to calm storms inside little hearts. The moment the song filled the room, the candle steadied. The shadows stopped crawling. Lilith's crying softened, then faded into silence so sudden Mara almost forgot how to breathe. In another part of the castle, King Darius Voss stood in his tower office, staring at yet another resignation letter. The handwriting was shaky, the message the same as the others. The princess was beyond help, the danger too great. Darius was more than a ruler. He was a legend. His name made rival kingdoms hesitate, and his crimson eyes had ended wars without a single blade drawn. Yet none of that power mattered when it came to his child. Since Queen Selene, his human wife, had died 3 months earlier, Lilith had become a living storm. The king could face armies without fear, but he didn't know how to reach a daughter who screamed for a mother that would never return. A guard knocked, tense and uncertain. "Your Majesty," he said. The human cleaner was seen near the princess's wing. Darius's jaw tightened. Any other night, he would have ordered the wing sealed, the human removed, the rules enforced. But then a strange report followed, one that sounded impossible. The princess had gone quiet. Not a forced quiet, not exhaustion, but peace-real sleep. Darius moved through the corridors like a shadow, silent and fast, stopping outside Lilith's door. He listened. No screaming, no cracking glass, no violent cold, just a child's steady breathing. Then, faintly, he heard the last echo of a human lullaby. And something in the immortal king shifted uncertainty, and the dangerous beginning of hope dawned. And when King Darius Voss stepped into the doorway and saw his daughter sleeping, he made one decision that would change everything. He would find the human woman who sang in the dark, and he would bring her to the throne. King Darius Voss did not sleep that night. He stood for hours outside his daughter's chamber, listening to the unfamiliar sound of silence. For 3 months, the castle had echoed with Lilith's screams, with shattering glass and shadow storms that even ancient vampires feared. Now there was only the soft rhythm of a child's breathing. When he finally entered the room, he moved slowly, as if afraid the moment would break if he stepped too hard. Lilith lay curled on her bed, clutching the torn piece of her mother's dress, but her face was calm for the first time since Queen Celine's death. The sight struck him deeper than any blade. He had conquered kingdoms, but he had not been able to give his daughter one peaceful night until the human janitor had done it with a simple song. By dawn, the order had already been given. "Bring the human woman to the throne hall," Darius commanded. His advisors hesitated, confused why a mortal cleaner deserved royal summons, but none dared question him twice. When Quinn was escorted through the towering black doors that evening, her boots echoed nervously across the polished stone. She had never stood in a royal court before. Vampire nobles lined the chamber like statues carved from ice, their crimson eyes fixed on her with open disdain. To them, she was nothing more than a fragile human who had wandered too far into immortal affairs. Yet she kept walking, hands steady despite the fear tightening her chest. Darius sat upon his obsidian throne, cloaked in shadows that seemed to breathe with him. His presence filled the hall like pressure before a storm. When he spoke, his voice was calm but edged with danger. "You entered the Forbidden's wing," he said. "You approached my daughter without command. Do you understand the risk of what you did?" Mara swallowed, but she did not bow her head completely. "I heard a child crying," she answered quietly. "I didn't know she was Forbidden's. I just knew she was hurting." A ripple of shocked murmurs moved through the nobles. No one spoke to the king so plainly, but Darius did not interrupt. His eyes remained locked on her, studying her not as prey, but as a puzzle. "You sang to her," he continued. "Explain why." Mara's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. "Because sometimes children don't need magic," she said. "They just need someone to stay." The words hung in the vast hall, simple yet heavier than any spell. Darius leaned forward, shadows curling along the throne's arms. 23 caretakers failed, he said. Trained specialists, royal tutors, blood mages. Many were harmed. Some nearly died. What makes you think you are different? Mara hesitated only a moment. "I'm not trying to fix her," she said softly. "I'm not trying to control her power. I'm just sitting with her grief." For the first time, something in Darius's expression shifted, not softness, but recognition. He remembered Celine saying similar words long ago when Lilith was born, when the court had feared the child's mixed blood. The memory struck unexpectedly. He rose from the throne, descending the steps until he stood before Mara, towering, ancient, dangerous. "Then you will prove your belief," he said. "You will serve as my daughter's caretaker." Gasps broke through the court. A human placed in charge of the vampire heir was unheard of. Mara blinked, stunned. "Your Majesty." "I'm only a cleaner." "You are the only one she did not reject," Darius replied. "If you succeed, you will be rewarded beyond measure. If you fail—" He let the silence finish the threat. That night, Mara was led back to Lilith's chamber, no longer as a trespasser, but as an appointed caretaker. The cold corridor felt less like a warning and more like a test. When she knocked gently and stepped inside, Lilith was sitting by the window, silver hair glowing faintly in moonlight. The child looked up immediately, crimson eyes searching her face with anxious urgency. "You came back," Lilith whispered. "I said I would," Mara answered, kneeling slowly so she didn't seem frightening. She didn't rush forward or demand affection. She simply sat nearby and began humming again, soft and steady. Minutes passed in silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Lilith shifted closer, inch by inch, like a wounded animal testing safety. Mara spoke gently, telling small stories about the human world, about rainy afternoons, warm kitchens, and how her own daughter used to hide under blankets during storms. Lilith listened with quiet fascination, as if hearing tales from another universe. Eventually, the child asked a fragile question. "Did you lose someone too?" Mara's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." The shared grief settled between them, not heavy, but understanding. Outside the chamber, hidden in shadow, Darius watched. He had told himself he was there only to ensure safety, but the truth was harder to admit. He was watching hope take shape in small, human gestures, brushing tangled hair, straightening broken toys, singing lullabies no vampire court had ever heard. And when Lilith gave a small, uncertain smile for the first time in months, the immortal king felt something unfamiliar stir beneath centuries of iron rule. And as Darius turned away from the door that night, one truth followed him into the darkness. This human woman was changing his daughter, and he did not yet know how much she was about to change him. Asterisk days slowly turned into nights, and Mara Quinn's presence in the Forbidden's wing became something the castle could no longer ignore. She did not behave like royal staff, nor like someone afraid of the princess's power. She moved through Lilith's chamber with gentle purpose, repairing torn curtains, gathering broken toys, and humming soft lullabies while she worked. She never forced conversation, never demanded affection. Instead, she offered something rarer in that cold, immortal world: patience. Lilith began waiting for her each evening, sitting by the door at dusk, as if afraid Mara might disappear if she looked away too long. Their bond formed in quiet layers. Mara told simple human stories, not grand heroic tales, but small memories filled with warmth. She spoke about baking bread with her daughter on winter mornings, about laughter echoing in tiny kitchens, about bedtime stories whispered under candlelight. Lilith listened like someone starving for a world she had never known. In return, the child began speaking in fragments about her mother, how Queen Selene used to sing while brushing her hair, how she smelled like moonflowers, how the castle had felt brighter when she was alive. Every memory carried both love and pain, and Mara never interrupted them. She let the child speak until the words ran out naturally. One night, Lilith asked softly, "Will you brush my hair like Mama did?" The request was so fragile, it almost broke in the air. Mara smiled gently and took the silver brush from the vanity. She worked slowly, carefully untangling the long white strands, treating each stroke like a promise of safety. As she brushed, she hummed again, and Lilith's eyes closed, her shoulders finally relaxing. Outside the chamber door, King Darius stood unseen, watching the scene unfold. He had come out of habit, telling himself it was duty, but now he lingered because he could not look away. The sight of his daughter calm, cared for, and smiling stirred emotions he had buried with his queen. But peace in Voss Keep never lasted without a shadow following it. 3 nights later, Mara discovered an old music box buried beneath torn fabric in the corner of the room. It was silver, engraved with delicate moon patterns, but cracked with neglect. Curious, she wound it gently. The melody that stumbled out froze her in place. It was the same lullaby her late husband used to sing to their daughter. The realization struck her chest like lightning. He had told her once he learned it from a human queen who lived among vampires. Now she knew that queen had been Selene. Before Mara could process the memory, the temperature in the room dropped violently. Candles extinguished all at once, plunging the chamber into darkness. Lilith's eyes widened with terror. "She's coming," the child whispered, backing away. Shadows twisted across the walls, gathering into a shape neither solid nor fully spirit. Slowly, a woman's outline emerged, elegant, sorrowful, wrapped in grief so thick it suffocated the air. Queen Selene's spirit had manifested, drawn by the song tied to her life. Lilith collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "She's angry," she cried. The apparition radiated anguish that made the walls crack and frost crawl across the floor. Mara's fear surged, but she did not run. Instead, she stepped forward, voice trembling but steady enough to hold the melody. She sang the lullaby fully this time, the human song that carried memories of warmth, motherhood, and love. The shadows slowed. The ghost's form flickered, her rage softening into something mournful. For one fleeting moment, Selene's spirit looked peaceful, almost grateful, before dissolving back into darkness. Lilith clung to Mara afterward, shaking. Mara held her, rocking gently as she would her own child. She whispered comfort until the sobbing faded. Neither of them noticed the tall figure standing frozen in the doorway until the silence settled. Darius had witnessed everything: the apparition, the song, the way the ghost had responded to Mara's voice. His expression was not anger alone. It was shock, confusion, and something dangerously close to longing. "How do you know that lullaby?" he demanded, voice low. Mara explained about her husband, about how he once served in the queen's household. Recognition flashed across Darius's eyes like a blade catching light. The past had reached into the present in a way he could not control. He looked down at his daughter, sleeping peacefully again in Mara's arms, then back at the human woman who had calmed both child and spirit. Something inside the ancient king shifted, not broken, but opened slightly, enough for feeling to enter where only command had lived before. And as Darius left the chamber that night, one realization followed him relentlessly. This woman was no longer just healing his daughter. She was awakening the past he had tried to bury forever. Asterisk. The peace that had slowly begun forming inside Lilith's chamber did not go unnoticed by the rest of Voss Keep. Servants whispered in corridors. Guards exchanged uneasy glances, and the vampire nobles watched with growing suspicion. A human woman spending every night with a royal heir was already scandal enough, but the rumors of laughter coming from the Forbidden's wing disturbed them more. To the ancient court, pain was expected, discipline was respected, but joy, especially human joy, was seen as weakness. Within a week, the council demanded an audience with their king. The great hall filled with nobles dressed in crimson and black, their expressions carved from pride and old prejudice. King Darius Voss sat upon his obsidian throne, silent but alert, his crimson eyes scanning the assembly. Lady Morgana, one of the oldest noble bloodlines, stepped forward first. "Your Majesty," she began smoothly, "we speak out of concern for the kingdom's future." Darius did not respond, so she continued. The human caretaker. Her presence is influencing the princess. The child laughs now, plays, even speaks of mortal customs. This is not fitting for vampire royalty. Murmurs of agreement followed. Another lord added more sharply, and there are reports of apparitions, your late queen's spirit appearing when the woman sings. This borders on forbidden sorcery. Darius's fingers tightened on the throne's armrest. So your grievance, he said slowly, is that my daughter is no longer screaming? The nobles hesitated, sensing danger, but pride pushed them forward. Our concern, Lady Morgana corrected, is that human attachment weakens the heir. Compassion is not a royal strength. The hall fell silent when Darius rose to his feet. His presence alone silenced centuries-old vampires. Strength, he said coldly, is protecting one's bloodline, not suffocating it. No one dared answer him directly, but resentment simmered beneath their bowed heads, while politics brewed in the throne room. Something far more personal unfolded elsewhere in the castle. Two servant maids whispered cruelly near the laundry corridor, their voices sharp with jealousy. That human thinks she's special, one sneered. She won't last. The curse will drain her like the others. The second laughed bitterly. When she dies, the princess will go back to normal. They never realized they were not alone. Lilith stood at the corridor's end, her small figure still but trembling with emotion. She had heard every word. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost crawled along the walls, and the candle flames died one by one. Lilith's crimson eyes glowed brighter than usual, not with childish fear but fury. You think she'll leave me? The child whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. The maids fell to their knees, shaking. Princess, we meant no disrespect. But the curse feeding on Lilith's grief surged outward. Glass shattered across the hall. Chandeliers cracked. Darkness spilled from her like smoke. Mara heard the explosion from 3 corridors away. She dropped the bucket she carried and ran, ignoring the exhaustion in her bones. When she reached the scene, she saw Lilith floating slightly above the floor, shadows spiraling violently around her. The servants were aging before her eyes, their life force draining under the curse's pressure. Lilith! Mara shouted, pushing through the dark energy despite the pain that struck her like ice and fire combined. She wrapped her arms around the child, holding her tightly even as the curse tore at her strength. I'm here, Mara whispered, voice trembling but firm. You're not alone. The power resisted at first, but slowly the storm receded. Lilith collapsed into her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The darkness dissolved like mist at sunrise. Guards arrived seconds later, followed by nobles and finally King Darius. He took in the destruction, the terrified servants, and Mara barely standing while still shielding his daughter. Without raising his voice, he gave the order. Take the princess back to her chamber. His gaze then shifted to Mara, lingering on her pale face and shaking hands. You will come with me. In the throne room, now empty, he faced her not as a ruler judging a servant, but as a father watching someone risk death for his child. This ends tonight, he said. I am sending you away. Mara's breath caught. You can't. She needs me. She is killing you, Darius replied sharply. I can see it. The curse feeds on your compassion. Mara's eyes filled, but her voice did not break. She's a child who thinks everyone leaves. If I go, it will destroy her. Darius stepped closer, conflict burning behind his controlled expression. Better her heart breaks than you die. That's not your choice, Mara whispered. The words struck deeper than anger. For a moment, he looked almost human, again tired, afraid, uncertain. But kings made decisions, even painful ones. He turned to the guards. Escort her beyond the castle gates. She is not to return. As they took her away, Lilith's scream echoed through the halls, raw and shattered. The castle itself trembled under the force of her despair. And as Mara was forced beyond the gates into the frozen night, both father and daughter realized too late the one person holding their broken world together had just been taken from them. The moment Mara, Quinn, was taken beyond the gates of Voss Keep. The fragile peace she had built inside the castle shattered like glass under pressure. Snow fell heavily across the dark valley as the guards left her at the border, rode with a pouch of coins and strict orders never to return. Mara barely noticed the cold. Her heart pounded not from fear for herself, but from the echo still ringing in her ears, Lilith's scream calling her Mama. She sank to her knees in the snow, clutching her chest as if distance alone was tearing something vital from her. She had lost a child once before to illness, and now the pain of leaving another behind felt just as unbearable. Inside the castle, midnight struck, and with it came the first violent rupture. Lilith's grief exploded without restraint. Her scream was no longer only a child's voice, but layered with something deeper, older, anguished beyond reason. Windows across the eastern wing shattered at once. Guards were thrown back by waves of dark energy. When Darius reached her chamber, he found his daughter floating above the floor, her body trembling as shadows spiraled like a storm around her. But this time, the shadows did not remain shapeless. They gathered, condensed, and took the form he both longed for and feared to see again. Queen Celine's spirit stood, fully manifested. She was beautiful and terrible all at once, her expression twisted by grief and fury. Her voice echoed through the chamber like thunder trapped in stone. "You let them take everything from me." The accusation struck Darius harder than any battlefield wound. He stepped forward, despite the freezing pain radiating from her presence. "Celine," he said, voice breaking with a name he had not spoken aloud in months. For a moment, recognition flickered in her ghostly eyes, but rage quickly devoured it. "You swore to protect us," she cried. "You ruled kingdoms, commanded armies, and I died alone." The walls cracked as her anguish surged. Lilith convulsed in the air, caught between her mother's bound spirit and her own fragile body. The curse that had imprisoned Celine within her daughter was unraveling violently, feeding on their shared pain. Darius tried to reach them both, but ancient strength meant nothing against a curse woven from betrayal and Forbidden's blood magic at the same time. Miles beyond the castle, Mara struggled through the snow, unable to walk away despite the danger. The bruises on her arms, marks of the curse draining her life, had darkened, spreading like ink beneath her skin. Every step felt heavier, but her heart refused to abandon the child who believed she had been left behind. She remembered the lullaby, the music box, the way Celine's spirit had softened at the melody. A realization formed slowly, but clearly. Her connection to the Queen was not coincidence. Love, memory, and sacrifice were binding threads stronger than magic. Back in the castle, Lilith's body began to weaken under the curse's violent surge. Blood traced from her nose as her small form trembled. Celine's spirit, though filled with rage, also showed torment. She did not want to harm her daughter, yet the binding forced her anguish outward. "I'm trapped," the Queen cried, bound to her grief. "I cannot leave." Darius felt helplessness for the first time in centuries. He had power enough to conquer continents, yet none to free his own family. And faintly at first, another sound entered the chamber. A human lullaby carried through the corridors. Darius turned sharply toward the doorway as Mara staggered inside. Breath unsteady, but voice strong enough to hold the melody. She should not have been able to return. The gates were sealed, the guards posted, but she had come anyway, drawn not by command, but by love. As she sang, the violent shadows slowed. Celine's form flickered, her fury softening into sorrow. Lilith's trembling eased as the curse's storm met something it could not devour: genuine, selfless care. Mara stepped closer, despite the pain draining her strength. She placed one hand gently over Lilith's heart and continued singing, tears falling freely. "You're not alone," she whispered to both mother and child. The chamber filled with warmth that did not belong to vampire magic, but to human devotion. The curse recoiled, weakened by the very thing it had been designed to destroy. Darius watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded again, not through power, but through sacrifice. And as Mara's voice steadied the storm, and the queen's spirit began to calm, the Vampire King realized the truth he had feared most: saving his daughter might cost this human woman her life. Asterisk. The chamber trembled as Mara's lullaby filled the air, fragile yet unbreakable, like a thread holding together two worlds that had been tearing apart. Princess Lilith still floated slightly above the ground, her small body trembling as the curse fought to keep its hold. Queen Celine's spirit hovered behind her, no longer raging wildly, but shifting between grief and longing. The shadows that had once lashed out in violence now hesitated, as if the ancient magic binding mother and daughter did not understand the warmth standing before it. Mara's voice shook at times, but she did not stop singing, even as the bruised marks on her arms darkened further, draining the strength from her body. King Darius stood frozen a few steps away, witnessing something no army, no sorcerer, no royal power had achieved. The human woman he had tried to send away was now the only force holding his family together. He could sense the curse feeding on her life, slowly but relentlessly. For the first time in centuries, fear gripped the immortal king, not fear of enemies, but fear of losing someone he had not realized he valued so deeply. He stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. "Mara, stop. It will kill you." She did not turn to him. Her focus remained on Lilith, on the child whose fingers were now clutching her sleeve in silent desperation. "She's worth it," Mara whispered between verses of the lullaby. The curse surged one final time, desperate, violent, as if sensing its hold weakening. Shadows lashed outward, cracking stone and extinguishing candles. Celine's spirit cried out, torn between rage and release. "I don't want to hurt her," the queen's voice echoed, now filled more with sorrow than fury. Mara took another step forward, placing her free hand over her own heart. "You're not hurting her," she said gently. "You're trapped, just like she is." The words carried no accusation, only understanding. That compassion struck deeper than any spell. Darius realized then what needed to be done. For centuries he had ruled through command and fear, but this curse was born from betrayal, jealousy, and broken love. Power could not break it, but truth could. He moved beside Mara, ignoring the shadows biting at his immortal form. His crimson eyes fixed on Celine's spirit. "I failed you," he said, voice stripped of royal authority. "I was king to a kingdom, but not protector enough to my queen. If my pride bound you here, then let my love release you." The admission echoed through the chamber like a vow reborn. Lilith cried out softly as light, not dark, but silver and warm, began forming where Mara's hand rested over her heart. The curse, starved by genuine love from both mortal and immortal, began to fracture. Celine's spirit looked at her daughter, then at Darius, and finally at Mara. Gratitude replaced anguish in her fading expression. "Take care of them," she whispered to Mara. "They need your warmth more than my shadow." Her form dissolved gently, not violently this time, breaking into glimmers of moonlight that sank into Lilith's chest like a blessing instead of a prison. The storm ended instantly. Lilith collapsed into Mara's arms, breathing but weak, the violent aura gone. The chamber grew still for the first time since Celine's death. Mara's strength finally gave out as well, her body sagging from the curse's toll. Before she could fall, Darius caught her, holding her with careful urgency. He expected to feel her life fading, but instead, the dark bruises on her arms began to recede. The curse, no longer fed by trapped grief, had lost its hold completely. Hours later, Lilith slept peacefully, not from exhaustion or suppression, but natural rest. Darius stood beside her bed, while Mara sat nearby, recovering but alive. The silence between king and human woman was no longer tense. It was understanding. "You saved her," he said quietly. Mara shook her head. "We all did." Darius looked at her then, not as a servant, not as a mortal outsider, but as someone whose strength had reshaped his world. His voice softened in a way few had ever heard. "You risked your life for my daughter. And for me." Mara met his gaze without fear. No child deserves to suffer alone. Respect turned to something deeper in that moment, not sudden romance, but the foundation of it: trust, gratitude, emotional closeness built through shared loss and sacrifice. Darius extended his hand, not as a ruler granting reward, but as a man offering place and belonging. "Stay," he said simply. "Not as a servant, but as family." Mara looked at the sleeping princess, at the king who had learned humility through her kindness, and she nodded gently. And from that night forward, the kingdom remembered one truth above all others: even the darkest royal curse can be broken when human love dares to stand beside immortal power.